Hello, I'm Casey Aiken, and this is 21 This Week. Coming up next, judge rules a congressional district that is shaped like a dead spider is unconstitutional. Why did the Washington Post run an anti-Elrich op-ed? And which county will determine the Maryland governor's race? Montgomery, Prince George's, or even Baltimore? Our panel of insiders will give you the story behind the story. We're joined by former county council member Nancy Floreen and Secretary of the Maryland Republican Central Committee, Marc Uncapher. Stay tuned for these stories and more on the next 21 This Week. On March 24th, Senior Judge Lynn Battaglia ruled that the new congressional map approved by the General Assembly violated the Maryland Constitution and Maryland Declaration of Rights. In a 94-page ruling, Battaglia described the initial map as a product of extreme partisan gerrymandering. She found it violated the state constitutional requirement that legislative districts consist of adjoining territory and be compact in form, with due regard for natural boundaries and political subdivisions. She also found it violated the state constitution free election, free speech, and equal protection clauses. In response, the Democratic-controlled Assembly issued a redrawn map, and which was submitted to the court yesterday, as well as the Attorney General, who has appealed the decision of Judge Battaglia. Now, the new map makes the districts more compact, but Republican lawmakers contend it's still riddled with unfair partisan gerrymandering. And according to Republican delegate Kathy Szeliga, the map barely gives lip service to Judge Battaglia's ruling, while Delegate Eric Lutke, the House Majority Leader, said the new map has significantly more compact districts and reduces the number of county crossings in those districts. Now, Nancy, we all knew there would be a fight over the congressional districts. We saw this in the last millennium when we did this. Do you think the General Assembly this time has met the spirit of Judge Battaglia's ruling as suggested by Delegate Lutke?
Well, Maryland was in the record books for its gerrymandering last time around. We really were up there. I think we were the number one worst state in the country in terms of gerrymandering, and they got away with it. So why wouldn't they do it again this time around? I looked at the old maps, congressional maps. The one that's the General Assembly, I guess they've approved it, and hopefully the judge is approving it today. I mean, it takes us back to the 70s. It's rational, makes sense. Like you might argue, if you were Mark, that you messed up some of our precincts. But for once, like Montgomery County it's only 2 districts now. Usually we're split into bits. There are no spiders out there. Everything's logical. It makes a lot of sense. You can always argue about the edges, I suppose, but I think that anyone's going to have a hard time picking a fight with this one.
Well, so Mark, certainly the new map is an improvement over the one that was rejected by the court, but does it meet the state constitutional requirement for being compact in form and respecting natural boundaries and political subdivisions?
Well, there's nothing like the prospect of a hanging to focus people's attention, and the hanging that would have come or will be coming is at the Court of Appeals. Obviously, there is a process for this, and I think it is all but certainty that the Court of Appeals will have the last word on this. And the comparison is not with the latest change, but the comparison really is with the Citizens Bipartisan Commission that set up a very detailed process to develop maps. And that will be, I think, one of the alternatives that the Court of Appeals will be considering.
And this one is pretty similar to that, frankly.
It has moved in that direction.
Very close, yeah.
Well, it did move in that direction. I mean, if you look at Baltimore and the congressional districts surrounding Baltimore, it's really different. I mean, Montgomery County, I think, is more similar in the design of the citizens redistricting map rather than what we had before. But I want to go on to another element of this, Nancy, because the online news site Maryland Matters suggests that the newly drawn district, that the one that is being considered by the court right now, could pose a challenge to Democratic incumbents in the 6th district, represented by David Trone, and the 5th district, represented by Steny Hoyer. What do you think?
Well, that's life in the big leagues, if you ask me. They moved Trone's district farther out. It still has, I think, a bit of Montgomery. It has Montgomery County in it.
Yeah.
And they have a hunk, and the other problem that the Republicans are struggling with, I'll say it very much, by and large, Maryland is more Democratic. So, he's going to have to work harder, but at least for David, he already had to. He had to go out to Garrett County. There are 4 Democrats in Garrett County, but he'd go out there. And I think, that's the challenge. Steny, he's a household name. I don't think he's going to have a problem.
So, Mark, I'll let you respond to Nancy's comments, but also the opining by Maryland Matters that now Andy Harris has a safe seat again.
Well, yeah, you probably will.
Probably, and probably to the frustration of Heather Majeur, who has moved out there and is challenging it. I think even when the district went into Anne Arundel County, he, at least in this particular election cycle, should have been assumed to be the favorite. The Hoyer district is interesting. It's one thing to talk about Steny Hoyer, but I think it's candidly unlikely that he'll be continuing to run through the entire 10-year cycle. And it's entirely possible, I hope I said that gently, but it's entirely possible that district could end up becoming that much more competitive in the future.
Does Neil Parrott have a shot at defeating David Trone?
Yeah, well, the interesting thing is, and I support Neil, as in full disclosure, is it's entirely possible that if the lines in 6 become more Republican, there could be some additional Republican candidates who would be very well funded, who could jump in. I'm thinking particularly of Ami Hober, who's ran twice before in that district. And then I throw the ball back to Nancy to say if David Trone feels he's got to spend, say $5 million to hold his seat for another 2 years, why doesn't he run for governor?
What an intrigue! That's an intriguing proposition, Mark.
Well, remember, John Delaney gave it up.
Yes.
And I think that's a legitimate question. How long can David stand it? Really, but it's a great satisfaction to be in public service, and he seems to have enjoyed it. He doesn't live there anyways, and it doesn't seem to matter. So we'll see what happens.
Isn't that great? Hey, we got to go on to our next topic, and I actually believe that this is probably more important to the everyday Marylander than the congressional districts, and that is the composition of the state legislative redistricting, which is which just wrapped up a trial, and the issue over whether multi-member districts conflict with the Maryland Declaration of Rights guarantees in the election, as we just discussed in our last segment. Nancy, what are your predictions and recommendations regarding the House districts?
Well, I would say, to begin with, I think voters are going to be shocked when they go to the polls and they get their ballot and they find out who they have to vote for, because there's so much change. And so, at least certainly in like John Sarbanes' district, congressional wise, this is going to be a big change for voters. The state legislative districts, I don't know how that's going to fall out. As I understand it, it's a constitutional issue. And the legislature is going to have to change that to make the advocates for change happy, which is, of course, not going to happen. And I don't know. I think it's always been wacky to me that we had a variety of legislators elected differently. And there must be a reason for it. I have nothing to say about that particularly, except that it's weird to begin with. but it's a tradition, and actually it's called for in the Constitution. So you can litigate away, but at the end of the day, it's going to be a legislative act, a constitutional change that requires everybody to vote on it.
Well, I think
how
Mark
those
will
go.
agree with you. It was weird to have people elected in two different manners. Isn't that
Yeah.
right, Mark? What do you think?
There was, and in a number of, looking outside of Montgomery County, of course, we have had multi-districts. In a number of other districts, it's been a tool of gerrymandering to pack one particular party in one of the smaller districts and then have the surrounding districts of a different party. And it's been a tool to try and lever partisan advantage. I think this is a strong case against the single member districts. And there is in fact conflicting, as Nancy references, really conflicting provisions at work with the Constitution, and it could well be something that the Court of Appeals takes a look at. It's tough to mandate that in this current redistricting round, and so I'm not quite sure. It was not something that it's something that the bipartisan commission struggled with, and they ended up keeping in a large number of districts. The multi 3-member.
Well, this is all going to end up in the lap of the Court of Appeals, and there have been some observers who have suggested that because Governor Hogan has appointed so many judges on the Court of Appeals that he has an advantage there. And do either of you have an opinion on that?
I don't know. I mean, my experience with judiciary is that once they get there, they really try to do the job the correct way. So, and of course, there are two sides to every story. The big issue is going to be timing, because when is the primary going to be? Right now, it's scheduled for July 19th. Are they going to push that further? They cannot push it too much further. Remember, they had to change the date of the primary a while back to satisfy the requirements for overseas voters and all that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. So before it was the beginning of September, so it has to be otherwise sometime in August, I think, at the latest possible date, which is inconvenient for many, many reasons. So the real question is, how is this going to work? If there is a challenge to the decision that Lynn Battaglia makes now, or she's already been challenged, is the Court of Appeals going to take it up in time and get this resolved really quickly? Who knows where they're supposed to file to run for office? I mean, it's a problem, and I feel really bad for the boards of elections across the state. We got to manage this. I mean, this is going to be it's a nightmare already because the date has changed. It's only going to get harder for them to figure that out, and also to get the word out to voters.
I got to give Mark the last word here.
Absolutely.
I think the Court of Appeals can act in the next week and provide a window of opportunity before what is now the revised candidate filing deadline of April 15th. But as Nancy said, that's a lot to have happen in essentially a 2-week period.
Well, as important as this topic is, I want to bring a little good news into the discussion about mapping, because just yesterday, after 2 decades, scientists have determined that they have completed the genetic map. The human genome map is now complete. So that's one mapping effort that we can all celebrate. Then when we come back from this short break, why is the Washington Post running a negative opinion piece about County Executive Marc Elrich? Stay tuned. And welcome back. For years, this show has debated which jurisdiction has more political clout in the state of Maryland. Josh Kurtz, writing in Maryland Matters, states that in the race for governor, Baltimore County is more important than Montgomery or Prince George's County. What do you think, Mark?
Well, Baltimore County, at least between the parties, has an advantage of being more of a swing county. Frankly, the Montgomery County voters are a little bit more one-sided. Although I will say Larry Hogan got over 40% in Montgomery County, carried a substantial number of precincts. Obviously, he did not carry the county, but that was the fact that Baltimore County, he did so well, and others as well, was more than enough to carry the state.
So are you agreeing with Maryland Matters that Baltimore County is the one that you have to court?
Well, the county, the areas, the electorate that are the most variable tend to be the ones that the political consultants will tell you to focus on, because those are the votes that are the most likely to move.
Well, I mean, we forget, Nancy, I'll go to you in just a second. We've got multiple candidates from every jurisdiction. I mean, how many from Montgomery County? 5 or 6? So Nancy, what do you think? Are we all going to cannibalize each other down here, and Baltimore County is going to be kingmaker?
Well, at least in the primary, I think that's likely to be the case. We are young here in Montgomery County. We've got so many candidates running. There's no one who can claim a home team advantage. So that we have so many good voters, but we're going to split the vote amongst all these candidates. I think Baltimore is more of a root for the home team community, and I think that's going to be a challenge for Montgomery County candidates. But you never know. I'm sure they're working it hard right now. The general is a different matter altogether, though, I do say, and I think Montgomery County is going to lead in that degree, just because we really show up. We're good at that.
Well, I think the opinion piece was really written about the primary because of the nature of the candidates, and Josh Kurtz points out that Peter Franchot has been spending most of his career in Baltimore County, even though he's from Montgomery County, trying to get votes. So that's that would weigh heavily in the primary, at least.
I'm sure they're all falling over each other at every possible opportunity up there.
Any last thoughts, Mark?
Well, I will say, I think that you can key point that Franchot, having been a statewide office holder, is much better known in those counties and has a leg up on that. That said, he does seem to be a little bit, I think, behind. He's not the leader, at least in the fundraising so far among the Democrats. Well,
now let's go on to our final topic. And that's back. We're going back home now. We're going to go focus in on Montgomery County. And in a county as politically active and heavily Democratic as Montgomery County, to have Montgomery County activists, write an op-ed in the Washington Post, criticizing the current county executive as not being progressive enough and needs to be replaced. Well, I mean, that was shocking, to say the least, and interesting. And for political junkies, we want more. So what do you make of this phenomenon, Mark?
Well, I think it's instructive that the piece spent about half of its text criticizing him on his criticism of the Thrive Montgomery 2050 initiative. And that was really the difference that made a big difference. And I candidly, on that issue, I have great sympathy with Marc Elrich. And maybe there's a circular phenomenon there, but it is clearly interesting for those who are not part of the Democratic primary, myself, to see that there is that divide that Marc Elrich is having to take on.
Well, what I found interesting about the article was the criticism, and this deals with the Thrive 50 Montgomery, but was about the number of housing units that have not been built, and because they're not directed to affordable housing, when we have a desperate need for housing units. I think we're actually producing somewhere near about 20% of what we actually need for the demands of the county. Nancy, you can have the final word on this topic.
Well, I would take exception to your view that the writers of that piece were criticizing Mark for not being progressive enough, because that means to most people very, very, especially liberal, extra liberal. And I don't think that's the case at all. I know at least one of the writers pretty well. And I think what they're saying there is that we need to think bigger and we need to deliver. And that has not happened under this administration in a variety of ways. The Thrive plan is just a plan. It's just a document that recommends some additional density in urban areas. It's not a big change in the community ideals. And in any event, it doesn't actually require it. It just says we should think about this there. So I don't think that's a showstopper right there. But they do criticize Marc as well for his stance on housing, and Marc is not a fan of it. He doesn't support it, and he's historically stood in the way of many projects. So that's Marc. I don't know if you saw the story that in the budget, he just got in the way of a dog park in Chevy Chase. And that's classic Marc. I'm not for things. And people love that. It's done well for him so far. So I don't think this opinion piece is going to make or break Marc.
Well, I understand that Marc is still leading in fundraising in the county. At least that's what I heard the other day. And that he's still seems to be quite popular. Now, you raised your eyebrows, Nancy, when I said that. So have you heard something different?
Well, I'll just say I haven't checked the state records. So I don't know what the reporting has been on that. But historically, Marc has not raised much money, hasn't really impeded his success.
Yeah, I don't think there has been a report out since January. So I think it's more sort of a whisper campaign talking about that. And clearly, the county executive, is up against a candidate who can self-fund. So it's hard to see where, it's hard to do an analysis based on that. We've got the primary coming up, presumably in July.
Well, so since you brought up David Blair, Marc, I mean,
Sure.
What has he actively been doing? I mean, it's been a very quiet campaign, at least what I've seen.
It has, and it presents obviously a challenge for him in that if there is such a thing as a anti-Marc Elrich vote, it is now split among a number of candidates, which gives the incumbent the advantage of a kind of base vote that he can draw on.
Well, you're going to have the last word there, Marc, because we have to wrap it up. We've got a hard break coming up. When we come back, stay tuned for Parting Shots. And welcome back. Now with Parting Shots, Nancy Floreen.
Well, I would say to people who are watching this, take the next week to do something nice for someone. Be kind, be generous. I spent this morning helping to pack food for food distribution in Langley Park. There's a lot of need out there, and the least we can all do for each other is be kind. Let them cut in front of you in the supermarket line or on the highway. Be gentle and be kind to each other this week.
Thank you, Nancy. It's a very, very nice thought. Marc, Uncapher, your parting shot.
I was going to say, Nancy, that's a lovely sentiment. I'm looking forward to the countdown to the deadline for candidates on April 15th. That's where it is right now. Should the legislative lines change, it will be a little like the children's game musical chairs, as people trying to dance around and figure out where to vote. I know my precinct in District 16 under the bipartisan commission would stretch over, the legislative district would stretch over to Tacoma Park, which is quite a change from where it currently, my district goes up to basically the crossroads in Potomac. And there are lots of examples like that. So we could be in for a very hair-raising couple of days should those changes be made by the Court of Appeals.
Well, I bet there are no changes in the precincts at Leisure World. I'm sure they stay locked in place. The most important precincts in the county. Anyway, we got to go.
Awesome.
I want to thank you for being here, Nancy and Marc, and I want to thank the audience for tuning in each and every week to Montgomery County's hardest hitting political talk show. And even though this is April 1st, there's no April Fool's joke. For 21 this week, I'm Casey Aiken.